Hello everyone, welcome to Module 2. We're discussing barriers to diversity. If you've made it to this module, then it means that you've completed everything in Module 1. So congratulations. So I begin with this quote from Maya Angelou. To think about barriers to diversity as we think about our own development of diversity consciousness. And while prejudice is one of the 6 barriers that Butcher addresses in the textbook, I think that as we go through this course, you'll notice that prejudice really almost becomes an overarching barrier that each of the other barriers is linked to. And these barriers fall into both personal and social realms. That there is something personal about prejudice, but it's also social in that it's learned. There's something that comes across as very social about ethnocentrism, but there's also a personal enactment of ethnocentrism. So we're going to go through these barriers in this video, and again, like the other barriers in this or the other videos in this course, I'm not going through every single element of the assigned readings. I want to hit the high points and share some of my perspectives about these topics as well. So, barrier 1, limited perceptions. A barrier to our own development of diversity consciousness are the ways in which we limit our perceptions. What are the figurative blinders that we have on as we think about interacting with people who are different from ourselves? Well, some of those blinders come in the form of perceptions, the snap judgments that we make of other people. And some of this comes, and those perceptions also come in the form of selective perception. And what's tricky is that we tend to be unaware of the blinders that we have on or obstructions that distort our views and our perceptions of other people. So as we think about perceptions, we need to ask ourselves how we come to know what it is that we know. In order to set the stage for embarking on a journey of the development of diversity consciousness, we need to consider where we are and where we've been. So there's a perspective where we come to understand that we only absorb a small fraction of the world around us. And we tend to tune in to those things with which we agree. An example I sometimes give is when I'm in an auto repair shop, invariably the television is tuned to Fox News and the remote is long gone and the channel changing buttons don't work. Well, Fox News is not something I would regularly tune to voluntarily because it's not something I agree with. But it's important to have those moments where I'm forced in some way to to be exposed to those varying viewpoints. And it's a reminder for myself that I need to be open to those other perspectives and other points of view. Our perception of others reflects on ourselves. So if we look down on other people because of difference or look at difference begrudgingly, that ends up reflecting on ourselves. Barrier 2 that Butcher notes is ethnocentrism. And this is the perspective where which people hold true to the belief that our people are not perfect, but our culture is superior to others. So in a study that was conducted not too long ago, a question like this was asked to people from a variety of countries around the world. And they were asked basically, to what extent do you agree that the culture in your country is superior to the culture found in other countries? And you can see here a snapshot of the responses. And not surprisingly, the United States is one of the higher uh, response rates. And I shared this picture because it's a good reminder as we think about ethnocentrism, where at some point everyone is a foreigner somewhere, that we are all outsiders at some points in our lives. Whether it's in a new land or in a new organization, we are an outsider. I worked at the University of Alabama for 6 years, and for 4 of those years, I worked in one department where I was regularly reminded by some of the staff that I was an outsider and always would be an outsider because I was neither from the state of Alabama nor had I earned a bachelor's degree at the university. And it had an impact on what I was able to get done in the organization and how I was able to relate to some of the people in the organization. And so ethnocentrism has an effect in organizations, and typically ethnocentrism reflects ill effects in an organization, hence why it's a barrier to diversity consciousness. So ethnocentrism is used as a tool to promote, instill, or install pride in an organization or institution. And then in the example I gave from my time at the University of Alabama, ethnocentrism is also used as a tool to marginalize. Ethnocentrism is used in advertising, suggesting that it's important to choose us and not them. We're more like you. The other guys are not. And ethnocentrism is limiting because we fail to see the world around us and we only focus on our own limited perception of who we are. And that perception is based on who we are not like. The third barrier that Butcher addresses are stereotypes. So let's think about some definitions of stereotypes, or a definition of stereotypes. And I think that a definition of stereotypes is best illustrated by this picture. Stereotypes reflect broad generalizations and where we picture someone as a representative of a culture, and that picture is based on almost like these pictures, caricatures. They're overdone. They're over accentuated in certain elements. And what becomes difficult and troubling with stereotypes is we use them in some sort of one size fits all perspective. So we develop a stereotype against or about a group of people, and we hold that stereotype, hold all members of that group that we interact with to that stereotype. And what's important to remember about stereotypes is generally they're wrong. So as I mentioned at the outset of this video, prejudice is an overarching theme when thinking about barriers to diversity and barriers to diversity consciousness. So in the reading from Gordon Allport in The Nature of Prejudice, I always like the definition that he provides, that prejudice reflects a pattern of hostility. And ultimately, prejudice is an irrational function for the individual. So as we think about prejudice for ourselves, again, one of the purposes of this course is for you to reflect on your own development, your own biases. So we need to think about, are there certain people around whom we're uncomfortable? Do we have a tendency to judge other people because of the way they look, the way they dress, how they speak, maybe the type of car they drive, who knows, any other variable? And are there times when we form an opinion about a person because she or he belongs to a particular group? And part of the belonging to a particular group is really, it's based in stereotype as well. These barriers all overlap and interact with each other. And it's that interaction among these barriers that makes them even more complicated. And so as I think about prejudice, I also think about xenophobia. And in the United States context, we usually think about prejudice based on racial difference and skin color. But I think it's important to also recognize that, especially since the attacks of 9/11 in 2001, but also before that, there's been a growing sense of xenophobia within the United States and also around the globe. And that also relates to ethnocentrism as well, where our sense of national pride is so deep that it then results in prejudice that gets enacted as xenophobia. The fifth barrier that Butcher addresses in the chapter is prejudice plus power. And it's important to talk about this as we think about, well, how did all these barriers really become enacted? How do we act on them? And so we're going to talk about power and isms, obviously specifically to racism and institutional racism, but I'm going to try to make some connections more broadly to a wide range of isms. So power is the ability to influence others and bring about change. Well, we have to think about how one acquires power and where does power come from. Discussions of power take on a different tone when set in the context of diversity. A lot of the dialogue that's going on right now as we think about power in the context of diversity in the United States, when we think about some of the growing social movement around Black Lives Matter, Baltimore Uprising, and related efforts, is the concept of white supremacy. And when I say white supremacy, I'm not talking about people in white hoods. So I'm going to post a resource on Canvas that's at the bottom of the Canvas page where you found this video for you to, as a supplemental resource, if you want to dig in a little bit more about this perspective of white privilege and what that means to power. Isms come in a variety of form, and isms reflect views of those in power that certain types of people are inferior and that unequal treatment is justifiable. And with racism and institutional racism, it's all rooted in the belief that the white race is better than or superior to another. And one concept that comes up is that there is also what some people label as reverse racism, where people of color espouse prejudicial remarks and that we generally label as racist. But racism is reliant on power, and without power, individuals are simply reflecting prejudice. And institutional racism is really it's about kind of broader socially constructed institutions, and some examples might be fraternities and sororities, the criminal justice system, and neighborhoods. All of these are socially constructed. And I post this image, and there's a bigger piece that is posted to Canvas as a supplemental resource as well, for you to get a bigger perspective, a broader perspective of different levels of racism. And prejudice plus power takes us to some scary places when it comes to quick prejudgment when the roots are in stereotypes. And the final barrier is discrimination, and some blatant forms would be police profiling, subtle forms be no longer being sent on business trips because younger employees have been hired. Individual forms of discrimination would be refusing to serve someone who is gay because their sexual identity is against your religious beliefs. And an institutional form of discrimination might be school or housing segregation. And in the context of racism, power is a necessary precondition for discrimination.